In this lecture, we're going to talk about painting brushes. So brushes that we would use to paint would include brushes that can change opacity, that probably have a little bit of texture to them, and even ones that have a wet brush effect, okay? Now, painting brushes is probably the broadest category of brush that there is out there because you can use really just about anything. Some of them are going to be better than others, but there are a few key things that we want and that are necessary to be able to paint well, okay? So, looking at this, one of them is actually the same one we used for sketching, right? Using the round brush can actually work pretty well for painting because it can get thicker or thinner depending on how hard we push, and we can get a nice soft blend with it, okay? So you can see here, if I go from this blue, I can blend it out the softer I press, and that's what we want, right? We want something that allows us to get a pretty decent gradient without having to get too choppy or work with our sliders over here too much, right? We want to keep it nice and efficient, okay? So round brush, even though we used it for sketching, it could be a great one for painting as well, okay? Looking over here, another great one that I like to use a lot is if we go to these charcoals, something that has a lot of texture like this charcoal block brush can also be pretty great depending on what sort of look or feel you're going for. So if I block in some color here and we throw in another shade or hue of blue, by pressing really lightly I can start to blend it together, right, and make that gradient. Now it's not as smooth as we did over here with the round brush, but it does give it more texture, right? So that just goes to show you can really use quite a few variances of brushes, right? It doesn't all have to be smooth, it doesn't all have to be textured. All you want is the ability to be able to change from, you know, dark to light and to be able to adjust that opacity as you draw. Because when you're painting, you want something that's going to allow you to get hard edges and soft edges without having to constantly switch between brushes. So this is a perfect example. You can see we can either get a really crisp, clean edge along that blue line, or we can have it fade into that gradient, okay? That also brings up wet brushes. So wet brushes are types of brushes that when you paint with them, they interact with their surroundings. So I'm going to bring in this color here, and you can see when I paint with this, it mixes with the gray behind it, okay? This is what a wet brush is, okay? These are good for painting because they can help it seem less digital and feel a little bit more organic. So when I'm painting this, for example, normally if I was painting with a different brush, all I would get would be this gradient effect like I had over here. But because I'm using a wet brush effect, I can blend it as I paint and it will mix the colors together for me. Okay, and that will give us a much more organic brush stroke look, okay? But you can see I have a little bit less control, right? It's not quite as smooth. Even though it's blended, it still feels like there's a lot of brush strokes in there, which is why there's tons of different options, right? Maybe I don't want something with as harsh of a brush edge as that. I can go with this acrylic one, which is a similar thing, but it's a lot smoother, right? There's a lot smoother blend to it, okay? So those are the things that you're mostly going to be looking for in a paintbrush. The difference between a painting brush and a sketching brush is, for example, with this fat pencil, it doesn't really get super large, and I have a pretty hard time actually blending because it doesn't really get lighter, it just gets thinner, as you can see, which means I have to put my strokes closer and closer together to really get a gradient. That's not what we want to have to do at all. What we want to be able to do is just push lighter, and then in response, it will make it so that our brush marks are lighter instead of getting smaller, as you can see here, right? That's what we're looking for. So those are some things to keep in mind when you're looking for a painting brush. Once again, remember, it doesn't matter so much about the specific brush, right? I know already I'm going to get a bunch of people asking me, what brush are you using? What brush are you using? It doesn't matter that much as long as you're using a brush that gets the properties you need, okay? You can use any brush, right? There's tons of different brushes out there. You don't have to use the same ones, okay? Now, if you've experimented a lot and you really want to know what brush I'm using, that's fine, but just remember, it's not so much about the brush as it is about your ability to do stuff with that brush. So anyways, that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you guys in the next one.